Bon après-midi, mesdames et messieurs. Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to ICAO's 13th Air Navigation Conference. This is day number 6, session number 25 of the SkyTalks series. Thank you for being here, and thank you for our panel of experts to share their thoughts. For those who have missed previous sessions, please make sure to go on YouTube and log in, type SkyTalks, ICAO SkyTalks, and you'll have the full list of presentations. And remember that we're coming to you live, so please give the presenter the opportunity to speak, and then I'll ask you after the presentation to go into the back and ask questions. Before we begin, one of the most common questions that we have is regarding the presentation slides. In the video, you don't see them. While you're presenting, you see them. They're here to serve as a cue for the presenter, and also for you guys to better understand the presentation. But if you you're interested in the content, please make sure to contact us and we'll give you the presentations. We'll ask for the appropriate companies get their answers, and we'll give them back to you. Now, leading on to our topic, I have had the opportunity to teach young children from grades 3 to third year high school in the past. One of my favorite topic was to talk about their most memorable day in their lives, and you would normally assume, their first pet, or the first time they tried chocolate, or the first time they met me. But strangely enough, that wasn't the case. I would say about 75 to 80% talked about when they got their first cell phone, right? For us, we're more like trying to read and trying to understand this, but for kids today, they're digital natives, right? Now, with this, if you think about it nowadays, you never leave home without a key and this takes lure of wallet even, as you can make payments with your cell phone. But with technology comes the only thing that limits this. Actually, it's Wi-Fi and power, as all of you know. When you would give anything for a bar, right, or for a little bit more power, but with that problem, we have issues with security. We've heard a couple of years in the past there was a famous manufacturer, a couple of them actually, that had problems with exploding batteries. And to talk to you a little bit more about lithium batteries and cargo safety, please welcome Ms. Lynn McGuigan, Technical Officer, Cargo Safety at ICAO's Air Navigation Bureau.
Thank you for that nice introduction, and thank you all for coming here today. I'm happy to speak about one of my favorite topics, lithium batteries. It's a subject that has been the source of intense discussions at ICAO over the last few years, and something that I spend a lot of my work at ICAO dealing with. The subject is the topic of cargo transport safety is tackled at ICAO using a multidisciplinary approach. There's a lot of different areas of expertise that are needed. The first, of course, is safety management. Safety management has always been important, but it's even more important now with lithium batteries and with the new risks that we're starting to see. Obviously, operations is a very important area of expertise. We need to make sure that operators are aware of the risks and that they're taking measures to mitigate them. Airworthiness of aircraft has always been an important area as well, but it's becoming even more important now as we're starting to discover that assumptions that we held to be true for many years may no longer be valid. And we're finding out that some aircraft capabilities are not enough to handle a lithium battery event. The emergence of unmanned aircraft will complicate matters even more when we start to look at what the capabilities of those aircraft are. And of course, security, which was mentioned in the introduction. Security people do their own work with regards to security of cargo, but there's a lot of things that they do that can also be applied to the safety of cargo. But there's also the potential for conflicts between the two. There may be risks, security risks that need to be mitigated, and those measures might conflict with safety. So we need to be very aware that we communicate with each other and make sure that we're not introducing things that might have an impact on the other. And then finally, of course, dangerous goods. And that's where I'll be focusing most of today's presentation, on dangerous goods. I'll give you a very brief overview of what dangerous goods are and how they're transported safely, how they end up on aircraft, and then I'll get into the whole subject of lithium batteries, what exactly the hazards are, and what we're doing to address them, and what the plans are for the future. Okay, so what are dangerous goods? Well, dangerous goods are articles or substances capable of posing a hazard to health, safety, property, or the environment. That's an official definition in ICAO documents. And you'll see on the screen there are some examples of packages of dangerous goods that are prepared for transport on aircraft. The one on the top left is a package containing explosives that can only be loaded on a freighter aircraft. It can't be loaded on a passenger aircraft. Underneath that, you'll see on the left a package containing radioactive material. And to the right of that package, you'll see a package containing miscellaneous dangerous goods, which is important for today's discussions because lithium batteries are classified as miscellaneous dangerous goods. And finally, on the right, you'll see a package of infectious substances. Dangerous goods are categorized into 9 different classes, and you'll see on the right some labels that are probably familiar to all of you. You'll see these labels on trucks when you're traveling down the highway. You might see them on sea containers, and you might see them on cargo being loaded on aircraft. They're consistent across all modes of transport. You'll see there's 9 examples here. There's a label on top for explosives, flammable gases, flammable liquids, flammable solids, radioactive material, infectious and toxic substances, corrosive substances, and finally miscellaneous dangerous goods. There's a new label that came into effect a few years ago for miscellaneous dangerous goods, and that's a label specifically for lithium batteries. Dangerous goods on aircraft. There's a misconception, I would bet that it might exist at this conference this week as well. If you polled everybody here and you ask them, what do you think is under your feet? What do you think is in the cargo compartment when you're traveling on an airplane? I would guess that most people would say baggage, and that's true. Passengers carry on baggage that may contain dangerous goods, and they check baggage, and that baggage may contain dangerous goods. Now, dangerous goods are forbidden to be carried by passengers. There are some exceptions, lithium batteries being one of them. But one of our problems is how do we make passengers understand what those restrictions are? It's something that we're going to be doing a lot of work on in the future with regards to lithium batteries because we're discovering that there's hazards that we didn't know about before, particularly if a passenger packs a laptop or some other portable electronic device in their checked baggage with another kind of dangerous goods such as an aerosol. There's been some disturbing discoveries about what could happen if a battery reacts in combination with the aerosol. So we're going to be doing a lot of work on educating passengers on what they can and cannot bring on aircraft. Dangerous goods are also on aircraft for the purposes of operations and airworthiness. Many of you might be aware of or remember incidents a few years ago with the Boeing Dreamliner aircraft and the lithium batteries that were used on that aircraft going into thermal runway and resulting in the grounding of the aircraft. And then finally, this will be the subject of the rest of the presentation, dangerous goods being carried on aircraft as cargo. They're carried on both passenger and cargo aircraft. And as I said before, there's a misconception where people may think the only thing in the cargo compartment is baggage, but that's not true. People use the cargo compartments for transporting cargo as well, and that cargo can contain dangerous goods. So how do we ensure safety on aircraft when we're transporting dangerous goods? There's requirements contained in a document called the technical instructions for packaging dangerous goods. So depending on the type of dangerous goods being transported, there's packing requirements that involve the type of packaging material you can use, and the quantities of dangerous goods that can be put into that package. There's no restriction on the number of packages that can be loaded on an aircraft. So the mitigation has always been largely at the package level. There was always an assumption that the quantities were so small that even if something leaked, there wouldn't be a hazardous outcome, and the aircraft safety features could contain it. There's also requirements for shippers to certify that dangerous goods have been packed, marked, labeled, and documented properly, so that gives operators a degree of confidence. There's a requirement for operators to do acceptance checks to make sure that the packages are in good order and that the marks and labels match what's contained in the documents. There's obviously stowage and loading requirements, and there's a requirement for the dangerous goods to be notified to the pilot in command so that he knows the quantities and location of the dangerous goods. The packaging of lithium batteries is a complex process because they are classified generally as Class 9 dangerous goods, but they're subdivided in 6 different ways. First, they're classified either as lithium ion, which are the ones we're most familiar with, rechargeable batteries that charge our phones and our laptops. There's batteries packed with equipment, and there's batteries contained in equipment. And the reason why they're categorized in those 3 different ways is because the equipment provides a level of protection that batteries on their own aren't provided. So the batteries on their own have been our biggest concern. So what is all the talk about? What are we worried about? Well, the main hazard is thermal runway. Batteries have the potential to go into thermal runway. And thermal runway is basically an uncontrollable elevation of heat and inside the battery. And when the battery heats up, it emits flammable gases and electrolytes contained within the battery that can ignite and cause a fire or smoke. And one of the other hazards that's of great concern to aviation is the ability for unburned gases to accumulate and build pressure inside a cargo compartment. And if enough pressure is built up, it could dislodge the pressure relief panels in the cargo compartment, and some of the fragments out from the battery could damage the cargo liner, causing the fire suppression agent to escape. One of the further complicating factors is that the degree of risk is dependent not only on the battery type, its size, or its energy density, it's also dependent on who manufactured it. The same battery made up of the same chemistries, the same design, but by 2 different manufacturers have shown to have different results when they're forced into thermal runway. So that makes it very difficult for operators to really know what risks are being introduced into the aircraft. As I said before, the risk mitigation has always been at the package level. One of the other big concerns with lithium batteries is that when one battery goes into thermal runaway, the heat it generates can cause the adjacent cells in the package to also go into thermal runaway, and that can pass on to the other packages in the shipment. So when you recognize the number of batteries that are being transported by aircraft, it's difficult for us to get precise figures from the battery industry, but we know that it's in the billions. And we have heard of some aircraft operators, cargo aircraft operators, saying that some device manufacturers actually charter aircraft, and there have been cases where a 747 has been loaded completely with lithium batteries. It's a risk that we've never seen before. There's been a lot of incidents involving lithium batteries, which I'm sure you have all heard of, and there's been 2 fatal cargo aircraft crashes, which crashed after fire started in the cargo compartment. The accident reports couldn't confirm if the batteries were the source of the fire, but they definitely were involved in the fire. And the UPS crash in Dubai in 2010, there were 80,000 batteries in that aircraft, and it resulted in the deaths of 4 cargo pilots. Fortunately, the planes did not crash in populated areas. All of this evidence and the risks led the International Coordinating Council of Aerospace Industries, which also represents airframe manufacturers, to issue a statement, and that statement is on the screen, saying that cargo compartment fire protection systems are unable to suppress or extinguish a fire involving significant quantities of lithium batteries, and that it presented an unacceptable risk to the air transport industry and flying public. When they issued that statement, this led a lot of air operators to start prohibiting, they would no longer accept lithium batteries on their own for transport. One of the ICAO mentioned significant quantities of lithium batteries, so there were attempts to quantify what that meant, what would constitute significant quantities. And there was a lot of testing done at the FAA Technical Center in Atlantic City. And what they determined was that it was impossible to put a number to it because, as what I said before, different batteries pose different risks. So in some batteries, one battery could pose an unacceptable risk, and other batteries were not very hazardous at all. But it's impossible to distinguish the batteries, one battery from another, because, as I also showed you, they're only classified based on the main chemistry, lithium ion or lithium metal. And also that what needs to be taken into account is the cargo compartment configuration and the capabilities of the different cargo compartments. There's just a very interesting picture to give you some perspective on the screen. You'll see a package of batteries. Those are the spare batteries that we're talking about, and then several of those packages on a pallet that was put together for testing. But it's not uncommon to have this number of cells on a given airplane. The number of cells in that example is 50,000 cells. All of this led ICAO to introduce a ban on the transport of lithium batteries on passenger aircraft. But ICAO recognized the incredible needs, the increasing needs of consumers for batteries and industry as well. There's the medical industry, the military. They're a necessity now in life. So we are trying to find a way that they can be transported safely. And there's 3 main areas that we're looking at now. One is provisions for safety risk assessments. We just finished developing risk assessment provisions for Annex 6, and those provisions have been sent out to all of ICAO's member states for comment and to relevant international organizations. A second component is the development of a performance-based package standard. So based on the principle that not all batteries are the same, this would be a package standard that would test a battery in combination with the package to maintain that, ensure that an event involving thermal runaway would remain inside the package. And the third way is appropriate hazard communication. It's obvious that that one label for lithium batteries isn't enough to convey the multitude of different hazards that batteries can present. So there's work being done to come up with a better hazard communication system. They are still permitted as cargo on cargo-only aircraft, but operators obviously have to go to take every measure to make sure that the risks are mitigated and that they're considering the batteries, the types of batteries, the numbers of batteries being transported on their aircraft as part of their safety risk assessment procedures. Some of the things that they'll have to look at are difficult for the operator to know. Battery types, the battery quantities and the density, the aircraft fire protection features, the location of the batteries in the cargo compartment, the proximity to other dangerous goods, and shipper compliance. So obviously this is difficult information for the operator to know. And that's why we are also developing guidance material for operators to conduct effective safety risk assessments. The performance-based package standard is actually being developed by an outside standard-making body, the SAE. They have set up a committee at the request of ICAO to take on this task. It was established 2 years ago, and although a lot of progress has been made, we're not there yet. It's very challenging when you have to take into account the needs of all the different stakeholders involved. And one of our biggest problems is the differences of opinion of what constitutes an acceptable level of safety from the battery industry versus the aviation industry. The lithium battery hazard communication is being undertaken by a UN body, which establishes regulations for all modes of transport, and it will allow a more granular hazard communication mechanism. Even with all of these measures put into place, we're still left with the fact that the air cargo transport system is very complex. A lot of subjects that are being spoken about this week at the Air Navigation Conference are things that can be dealt with in the closed aviation system. But when it comes to cargo, we're moving far away from the aviation system and involving so many different entities. So it's very difficult to ensure that all of those entities are doing their part to ensure safety. We're going all the way to the beginning of the process at the cell manufacturer level. How do you know that the cell manufacturer is producing quality batteries? Those cells are often shipped to a battery manufacturer who takes the cells and builds a battery out of them. Risks can be introduced at that point as well. And then the batteries can be shipped to electronics manufacturers to build devices, and then finally to the end user. All of these entities can be shippers. How do you know that every step has been taken to ensure safety? There's a lot of pressure from the battery industry on the aviation industry to do more oversight of non-compliant battery manufacturers. That's a difficult thing for the aviation industry to do. So we're starting now to try and make the point that the battery industry needs to take measures to ensure that there's some way of identifying quality battery manufacturers versus ones that are trying to make batteries, cutting costs, and maybe not making batteries as safe as they should be. So what's the reality? Well, the reality is that the dangerous goods system has historically relied on trust. There's always been trust that what is inside the package is safe, and trust that if the requirements are adhered to, safety is maintained. The requirements now are very prescriptive, and we're realizing now that this isn't enough when it comes to these new risks that articles such as lithium batteries are presenting. The early days when the dangerous goods system was originally developed, most of the dangerous goods that were being transported were substances with very, very clear criteria for determining the risks. But now articles, it's a much more difficult process to adequately assess the risk. And the risks keep changing. Consumers want batteries that last longer and that are lighter, so they're putting a lot more into a smaller battery. And of course, as I said before, the complex supply chain only complicates matters further. So those prescriptive regulations are no longer sufficient. We need to really focus on a risk-based approach to mitigating the risk. It has to be designed into this complex system. Everybody has to be aware of their responsibilities, and there has to be a way of ensuring that when the goods are finally offered for transport on an aircraft, that everybody has done their job in ensuring safety. So that's where the safety management principles come into play. It's essential that operators assess the safety using safety management system principles. So what's the future? Well, the future is focusing on really knowing the risk and making sure that everybody is aware of it and knowing how to manage it. We have to ensure that there's safety through the supply chain. One of the reasons why I like the opportunity to be able to speak about this subject to as many people as possible, because this is one of the areas in aviation where every single person can contribute to the safety. You all are using lithium batteries. You all purchase lithium batteries. You all carry them on aircraft. So after this presentation, I hope you will all consider when you're purchasing lithium batteries not to be too enticed by cheap batteries that may be counterfeit or not safely made, and that you'll consider what you're carrying on aircraft. There's a requirement that passengers not put spare batteries or power banks in checked baggage. As I said before, it's difficult for us to get that message across to passengers. You're all passengers, so here's a message. Please ensure that you carry your spare batteries and power banks on the aircraft. That's it from me, so if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Yes, go ahead. There's a microphone behind you.
Yeah, David Gamper from ACI. So Lynn, it's a very interesting talk. You were focusing mainly on cargo, but you did mention one thing particularly at the beginning which caught my attention about aerosols and the risk of those in checked baggage being next to a battery or perhaps in a device which includes a battery. Are there other things that you want to include in the kind of comprehensive risk assessment for checked bags?
That's one of the areas that we're working on right now. The ICAO Council actually established a multidisciplinary group of experts called a Cargo Safety Group to tackle this issue. It arose earlier this year when security measures were introduced to mitigate a security threat, and the measures required passengers to check their portable electronic devices and check baggage. from certain airlines from certain parts of the world. And this, of course, introduced a safety hazard. And we realized that we really didn't know the extent of that safety hazard because there had been a very common assumption that most passengers carry their portable electronic devices on the aircraft. So the FAA Technical Center did a lot of testing to determine what the hazard was. And this is one of the things they discovered, that if a portable electronic device is packed next to another dangerous good, such as an aerosol, and the battery in the device goes into thermal runaway, it could cause an explosion and an uncontrollable fire that could compromise the aircraft. So there's still work being done on this by all of the different panels, the airworthiness panel, the operations panel, the dangerous goods panel. But what we need to do, and what a lot of states have been doing, is we need to at least take great efforts to communicate this risk to everybody, to states, to industry, and to the traveling public, so that they're aware of the risks. Any other questions?
I think with this topic, we're in this fuzzy zone, arguably for the first time in terms of good actors and bad actors, terrorism and passengers. So the more we remind passengers, don't pack these things in your checked luggage, the more we sort of tell the bad actors the thing to do is pack it in checked luggage. And it seems like this is a conundrum that we really have not quite faced before in that respect, something that is so extremely common, and it's just a matter of how the actor handles that particular item. So I don't know if there's any light you can shed on some ways we might be addressing that part of the problem.
Yeah, I think you raise a very good point. My area in ICAO deals with safety, and it's not a common thought for us to think of these sort of intentional acts of unlawful interference or something along those lines. That's the reason why we really need to be having strong coordination with our aviation security colleagues, and we are doing that now. And we'll be doing more of that in the future. Any other questions? Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Again, it was a pleasure to speak with you today, and thank you very much for coming to listen to me.